Hello humans, welcome back. Today we're going to be taking a look at the graphical user interface of Unreal Engine 4. Um, you may have an understanding of what the editor is, but it's still best if we just take a closer look and examine a couple of these tabs here and what exactly they're for and what they do. Now we're gonna start with the upper right corner, the uppermost right corner, because this is your scene outliner. You probably may have noticed this is the most visible part of your editor, the center part. It's the viewport. Essentially, anything that's in your viewport, okay, because in your viewport you're always going to have a map loaded. And anything on that map, which is technically a level, will be listed in this here tab, okay? And now, these folders here, they're already pre-made. But they're best done for, in general, they're done for organization purposes. It's also available for you, if you want to search for something. Let's see, we got 2 chairs right now and 2 floors, 1 statue and 1 table. But you can imagine if you have a big enough level, you can have hundreds of chairs and hundreds of statues and thousands of floor pieces. Depending on how you made the level. As you might imagine, if you want to find something, it'll be quite difficult. So the search option here is also available to you. You can also label stuff later down the line, and just basically it's an organization tool, okay? You can even have the view options here, and you can just hide different things and choose different worlds. In general, you shouldn't really use this that much unless you have a very highly populated level. But it's still best to be able to, to just organize things in volumes and in folders, etc. So whatever floats your boat, really. You can be full chaos and just know what you need usually when you search for it, or you can organize it like this. And obviously you can collapse these. Okay. Now the next thing here is you're going to see right now we don't see anything is because nothing is selected currently in the viewport. This is your details pane, and it actually is a very powerful tab, so to speak. You're going to use it a lot, all right? Let's just go ahead and select the center statue, right? This thing in the middle. So we're going to click here, and there we go. We've selected it. Now, we're not going to do anything else here in the viewport. I just want to take your attention here to these tabs here. So let's work from top to bottom. Now, first of all, you've got this top thing here, which is essentially your composition. Okay, that's your object composition. In other words, what kind of stuff do you have in your object, right? If you had a particle system here, maybe some sparks, or this was on fire, your particle system would be here. I'm going to explain to you what composition-based game development is, how is it different from inheritance. From what I can see, the Unreal Engine is mostly focused on composition, although inheritance is certainly possible and certainly used whenever it's applicable and whenever it's best used. We're going to basically ignore these 2 bits here. Just understand that this is your object stack, okay? Whatever you add to this object, you can either add it through the viewport, okay, and have it sit here, or if you want it to be a permanent piece of the object, you just add it over here. And we're going to talk about blueprints because, a blueprint is a very it covers a very wide spectrum of objects. Okay, after that, you've got the search here. Obviously, you can search for a particular option that you want, but we're not going to do that just yet. You have your little, the properties, right? If you want to do some fancy stuff, but you wouldn't really need that in general. You can maybe reduce the tick rate or increase the tick rate. And look, they got something cool here, which you can pin properties. But you can add things like the tick rate, right? In other words, how often it is, like tick interval right here. You can check it out. Before the physics is calculated or after the physics is calculated, which tick group it's on. And we're going to talk about ticks and updates and all that jazz, like rendering and application and replication. This is for multiplayer stuff. Rendering is obviously for visible things, navigation and actor. These are all options that are not readily available. In other words, they're not all of them, for example, are in the details pane. But for basic purposes that we're going to use this as an example, we don't really need all of that stuff here. So first we got the transform. This is your tab where you're going to see all of the coordinates and all of the properties of the object that you've selected. In other words, right now we can take a look and say that the x value in the world for this object is minus 181, and it's 1 centimeter in the y value. So if you take a look at over here, you got z, x, and y. Z is pointing upwards, x is pointing back and forth, and y is left and right. So it's a little bit 1 centimeter to the left, relevant, by the way, to the world center. Okay, the world center is 0, 0, 0. This is the center of your level. So this is one centimeter from the left of your center. Okay, and obviously it's 102 centimeters up in the air. Therefore, meaning that this table is 102 centimeters high. After that, you've got your rotation. It's minus 169 right now, but you can rotate it whichever way you like. Obviously, you can manipulate these over here. As you can see, it's rotating, right? You can manipulate the rotation here. And obviously, again, you got the scale. Obviously, we need to actually, before we start modifying something, we need to check it out. Yes. Very good. The file is checked out now because, after all, remember, we're source controlled. At least in my case, it's on the local server. I disabled the online server because I don't think this is, I don't need the online version for this. But you might want to get used to, to using the online version on Google Cloud, for example. Right, next you got the scale. Obviously, the rotation works in any axis, right? You can rotate this way, you can rotate it that way, and at the end of the day, you can just reset it to 0. Okay, now in this case, this looks a bit crooked, so you might want to put it to minus 169. Just looks a little bit better. Now after that, you got your mobility. There's very well explained tooltips on this stuff. In general, you can also press Control and Alt to see whenever there's a tooltip, you might be able to press Control and Alt, and it will give you a deeper explanation of it. For example, if you hover over here, like this, for example, right, and you hold Control and Alt, and it's going to give you a detailed explanation along with a link to the full documentation, which will open in your browser of choice, the default browser. Anyway, so the mobility is essentially telling the computer how heavily and how intense this object is going to be. The static is the easiest one because, it's the fastest one to draw. It's not really moving. It doesn't have to update every so often. And you can bake lighting on it, which essentially means if you put a flashlight if you fire a flashlight onto this object, you can basically take a picture of what kind of light is being applied to a particular surface, and then it's going to turn to a texture, which is basically wrapping paper, right? So you can imagine, we'll talk about light maps later, but this is the basic principle how light baking works. Obviously there's more complex stuff behind the scenes, such as light probes, etc. How far light reaches, so that it's a more accurate bake. Usually lighting takes a long time to bake. So this is what you do at the end of your game development cycle before you release the game. Just for mobility, this is what you select for static, right? All of this stuff is static. It's not moving. Now, a stationary object is a little bit different because it can have dynamic shadows. In other words, you can change it in game. Okay, you can still, for example, it'll be physics enabled. So if it be a statue that has to be broken down, let's say you have a game where the main character blows up a statue, which would be the objective, and the statue fell. The statue would be a stationary target because when it fell, it would actually, the shadows and the lights, they would have to be recalculated, right? It's not going to be like a wall. A wall is a stationary object, and unless you be able to break through the wall, for example, right? It'd be static. My bad, static, not stationary. So stationary objects are things that will be used in the game, modified somehow. So it's enabling you for different things. Obviously, moving objects are the most difficult to render because they have to update every second or every 60 times a second, depending on the tick rate, whatever you set it up to be. It's basically the slowest thing to do, okay? The most computationally expensive thing to do. So whenever you're placing something in your scene, you want to define the proper mobility of it. All right, now, a statue would be static, but you wouldn't want to set it as movable, right? Because it has to be calculated every so often. And static stuff is not calculated at all, right? It's just loaded in there and it's in there. It's usually just level geometry. After that, you got the static mesh. In this case, this is basically what you see. A mesh is essentially the visual representation of your 3D model. So it doesn't really matter. Like when you're creating an object, you can always change the shape of it. For example, we could change this into a cube or a table right now, or a shelf. Although in this case the shelf is a little bit different, but as you might see, like basically the mesh is your outline. So let's go back to the statue. Right, there's the statue, and I actually lifted it up too high. There it is. Okay, so what else we got here? We got your materials. Actually, in the static mesh, by the way, you have a drop down which you can add a blocking volume to it, which would be sort of like a invisible wall type deal, right? Or you know, depending what you need, it could be a trigger volume or collision volume, etc. You know, to return information. But we're going to talk about volumes in another video as well. This is just a run through. The materials is basically how your object looks. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You can just take a look here at the editor. And there's a bunch of stuff here. On the right, you got a palette of functions. On the left, you got like these material properties, etc. You got the preview section, right? You have two materials. So in this case, you have one material, which is the main material. Right, this is the main material of the object, and then you have the transparent material, which would be the glass material. Right, this is glass. I'm not very well versed with working with the material editor in Unreal. I prefer Substance, but it's nice to know. We're gonna go over it in a very basic manner, but you know, as it stands right now, this is your last concern. All right, the materials, they're like you can actually be a specialized material guy when it comes to UE4, because these are essentially shaders, right? When someone says shaders, well, these are your shaders. As you can see, the result of the glass is, you know, it's transparent. As you can see here in the blend mode, translucent. And, you know, it basically creates this glass type deal when, you know, things fly right through it. And you can obviously change it here if you want to into different objects. Oh, sorry. That's when you have actually a mesh. But anyway, let's forget about this for now. So essentially what you need to know is you can assign materials here, okay? And you can set different textures, for example. But anyway, onto the physics tab. Here we have the simulation, the physics simulation. So if you enable it here, the things will fall when you simulate or play the game. But in general, this is just a tab where you could take a look, and it's going to explain everything fairly simplistically, right? Center of mass, you can actually control Alt here, and it's going to explain to you where the center of mass is, what's it going to do. It's usually, you know, when you have not only for vehicles, but in general, where the center of mass is going to be, where the object is heaviest, all right? But usually it's in the middle of the object, next or on the origin point. Obviously, you got the mass scale. It can be negative, I believe. Yeah, so the mass scale is it could be negative or positive. I think this is how you affect gravity if you want to revert gravity. Oh, sorry, my bad. You can somewhere here you could actually reverse gravity or play with gravity numbers. It may be the mass itself, right? If you go to negative mass, it should fall upwards. I'm not sure what was the trick here, but there's definitely a way. If you look around here, you'll find something if you want to play around with physics. Same goes for collision. It's fairly self-explanatory. You have your collision events and enablers. For example, if you would enable this, simulate a collision, and this would generate a hit event. In other words, if you hit, for example, if your player bumps into the statue, this will actually give you some information in return, as in during, like in the code, right, in the logic, so that, let's say, if the player hits the statue, this statue is going to explode and the player is going to die. So this is how you would do it, right? You would the simulation generates hit events, but this is only, by the way, when you simulate the game, right? The actual collision based detection and hits is when you usually done when you play the game. We're going to talk about the simulation and this stuff a little bit later. Actually, let's explain it right now. The simulation basically means that, as you can see here, you can play the game in different modes, like you can pop it out or you can play it as a standalone game. But the simulation basically allows the physics engine to run, basically runs the game and all the logic on it mostly. However, you're still allowed to make changes. So if you hold Control and Alt, you can actually see what it means. Basically, things happen, like you can test AI, right? As you can see, during simulation, physics, blueprints, C++ code, and animations are all active. Right? Basically, you don't play the game plays itself during the simulation. This is your, simulate button here. Obviously, there's a hotkey here. You can change it later down the line. This is also where if you want to run a dedicated server, for example, it's going to run in the background. And you can go into advanced settings, but this is going to open the the editor settings tab, or the project settings tab. Like, these are huge tabs, so we're going to go over them in another video. Like, collision is, like I said, fairly self-explanatory. It's what collision is. You collide into stuff. This just allows you to create different events if you want, let's say, to have an overlap event. Because it's a little bit different. The overlap event is if something actually overlaps. Let's say it's for trigger volumes mostly. How should I explain this? Imagine you have some grass, right, on the ground, and like this is not how it's done, by the way. But I'm just giving you an example. This is how it used to be done. You have some grass or some sticks on the ground. You want to generate a sound whenever the player goes over the sticks. Let's say it's a hunting game. So whenever the player goes over the sticks, it's going to make a loud sound of sticks breaking. Yes, please save. It's going to make a loud sound of sticks breaking, but how are you going to know when the player stepped over them? Well, you need to generate an overlap event, meaning that this object will give you information in your code, in your logic, basically, blueprint code, whatever, and you'll be able to say, all right, listen, something walked into our sphere of influence here, and it's actually a human. Right, it's a player. It's not a, for example, an animal or a boulder. It's a player's, and you only want to activate it when the player does this. Although in general, you'd want to activate it whenever something else goes over it as well. But this is just to illustrate my point. Anyway, what else we got here? We got the lighting. This is a little bit more in depth here because you got different lighting setups and what kind of shadows it's going to be. Honestly, the tooltips are usually self-explanatory, and they have a lot of information. Just pressing Control and Alt on them. In this case, for some reason, it just goes on the other side of the screen. But you can just take a look at these, and really, they're fairly self-explanatory. I'm not going to go over all of these here. Just so you know that the shadows and the lighting, all this stuff is actually in the Details tab. Obviously, you can set these things globally in your project settings as well. And you can have, by the way, different lighting channels. They work like the RGB channels similarly, or alpha channels, or you can even have masks of different masks. But that's from another tab. Anyway, onto the rendering. Obviously, the visible, invisible. This is if the object is visible or invisible. And rendering basically means drawing. All right. So whenever you hear rendering, it means that the computer has to calculate where everything is and draw it onto your computer. Obviously, rendering goes, there's different types of rendering, like forward rendering or deferred rendering. But we're going to talk about these two types and these two modes later down the line. However, be aware that not all platforms support the same rendering techniques. For example, mobile and HTML5, well, HTML5 mostly. As far as I know, currently only supports forward rendering, and so does VR, I think. I'm not sure. I'm not into VR yet. But don't let it boggle your mind just yet, because you're just starting out. Obviously, you can do a lot more research on rendering if you want. And here you've got a little bit more details here. You've got your different texture streaming. Like if you have a big ass texture, right? You can configure stuff around it here. The level of detail on different objects as well. So this is also control from this tab here. So if we were really far away, I'm talking like if this was like very small, you wouldn't really see the fine details or the translucency of this object. So you would have defined the level of detail and how it works. The cool thing about Unreal Engine 4 is that right now it can actually generate level of details for you. In other words, before you had to actually make 4 or 5 versions of this thing, and each version would be less and less complex. In other words, it'd be an uglier and uglier version of this statue here would be available to you. So the further you get away, and that's how you set up the level of detail, by the way, the further you get away, different meshes are loaded essentially, so as not to take extra memory. However, Unreal can do it for you. Obviously, it's not as good as you doing it by hand, but it sure saves a lot of time, especially if you're prototyping or even on small projects or small games. Like on something huge and open world, you'd want to probably do them yourself. But in general, this does a really good job of, basically optimizing your rendering for you. However, in our game, we're not going to use this because we're only going to see, we're only going to see the beach and the worms playing with a volleyball. But like you see, you can actually have different arrays, right? You can override materials as well if you want to have the, less, like maybe not a translucent one, or maybe just a simpler material. All right, and you've got a bunch of these different things like decals and render in mono. I don't even know what that is. True, the component will be in mono only. Okay, so whatever it is, I have no idea what this is. Most of these things are really specialized, and like if you need it, you'd know you need it. All right, and like I said, the documentation is very well. You can read a lot of stuff about this here. The next thing you got the tags. In general, this is easily done for so that you can find stuff over through code, right? So let's say you want to find this statue here out of the blue, right? Out of nothing. Through your blueprint. So what you do, you get every object in the scene. Well, this isn't the only way, but you get every object in the scene and you scan it for if it has the tag of a statue. So you create a tag of called statue, and if it does have the tag called statue, then this is the object that you're looking for. So you're gonna use that object and do whatever you want with it. Maybe make it blow up. But this is how the tags work. Cooking is essentially like baking. I think it's like baking in this case. Yeah, so this is essentially if you want to, like when you're building the lighting for example, right? When you're baking your lighting, you could exclude this object off of it. And then you got the actor, which is you can turn it into like if this was a player character, you could turn it into a statue, right? I believe. Or you could turn it into a foliage actor. I'm not sure. This is I never really used this bit here, but like I said, this is a very powerful, like there's a lot of details here on this tab. All right, and if you have a second monitor, you'd probably be better off actually flinging it to the side and having it on another monitor, because there's quite a lot of stuff here and it doesn't really fit all the time. The mobile and the navigation essentially is for your mobile builds, and the navigation is for like if you have a nav mesh, or it's for your AI mostly. Okay, because well, not only for your AI, but like if these were stairs, you'd probably set them up to a particular angle so that let's say if it was a mountain, how high the player could go over the mountain. But then in general, you could also set it up from the code. Anyway, this is the details tab. So like I said, quite a lot of stuff, but mostly you're going to be using this pane here, this pane here, and this pane here, and maybe the physics, right? And maybe the collision. Very rarely you actually use rendering options. You actually set them on a per object basis. All right. So there's that. Okay, so that bit is done here. Let's actually go and take a look over the viewport now, because like I said, the viewport is quite an important piece of screen space. And so let's just actually get these things out of the way. Now the play, we already went on it. The launch is actually a little bit different. This is where you build your project, right? You've got your different operating systems and the devices, and the project launcher is actually what you're going to deploy on. After that, you got the build, so you can build the lighting only, and you can select the lighting quality. By the way, this is obviously just a preview, but production would show you exactly how it's going to look once you build it. You can have loads of lighting info, like there's a bunch of information of here, what's kind of resolution, the density. Then you got the arrow coloring. There's a bunch of different things you can build, like the geometry or the level of detail here. Even the navigation paths, like for AI and even players. You can verify the whole map. But in general, this is your menu. This is the menu that you're going to be using whenever you need to build something, right? Whenever you need your computer to do some computation. Whether it's to build some lighting or verify the map or whatever it is you want to do. Cinematics, fairly self-explanatory. Again, this is how you add. This is how you make cinematics in your game. The blueprints is a little bit different. This is essentially, for example, the level blueprint is your overarching blueprint that you run on this level. How should I say? This is the logic. This thing stores all the logic on this level, but it's not the same as regular blueprints, right? It has a few different things. Like you don't need to reference stuff in it directly. I mean, you can reference stuff in it directly because if you select them in your content browser, you can just input them there. Some things don't work here where they work in others, but you can set the game mode here, by the way, as well. The game mode, right? We're going to talk about the game mode later, okay? Because the game mode is, it's quite a big piece, and really the game mode is essentially the thing that controls your game. It's like your game controller, right? It controls the damage. It basically is like a big hub of activity, all right? Look at it this way. Anyway, this is your blueprint setting, and then you got the settings here, which is your world settings, the plugins, like what kind of quality you got here, right? You've got your the quality level in different shaders, etc. You got how much volume, if you have volume here, which would be playing without you actually playing the game, as far as I'm aware. Your snapping, which is quite interesting. As in, if you have soldiers, you want them to snap one to each other. Maybe they're forming a soldier wall. You can enable this and the distance to the snap. The socket snapping is if you have, let's say, your player character has a sword or some kind of gun, and you need to place something in his hands, or it's a statue with a sword and a shield. You want to place a sword and a shield in their hands. You just enable the socket snapping, and as long as they have sockets defined in their hands, whatever you place there will be actually snapped. And the vertex snapping and the planar snapping, I think, I'm pretty sure the vertex snapping can be activated with V. I'm not sure why it can actually permanently enable it here. Okay, never mind. This is actually a little bit of a different setup here. But the vertex snapping is like point snapping, and the planar snapping is like so that it doesn't go through this wall. Anyway, obviously you can hide the viewport UI, and you can preview a bunch of different things like the polygons and all the level of details. And like if you have a particle, let's say sparks, you can freeze them in time. So a bunch of cool stuff here in the settings. Obviously these two open a separate tab, like the world settings, for example, gives you basically everything about this world, as in the level. So it's like the details of the level. You could just keep it here. It's not a big deal. There's not that much here. Just in general, you could most of the stuff you could actually set here, right? Or in the build menu, or in the play menu, right? Or in the blueprint menu, like the game mode, for example. Also, you can set it either here or here. Like I really don't find the world settings that much, but like there's a bunch of nifty little things you can check around here, like the maximum render distance, etc. We're not really gonna use these, so like this is irrelevant right now for our current purposes. Anyway, yeah, the marketplace and the content browser is already open, so it's no biggie. The marketplace is gonna open, obviously, the marketplace in a new tab on your browser. The source control, we already went over this, and the save current is obviously saving your current status of the game, as in the project. Okay, now let's go actually to the viewport. We're gonna start from right to left, and actually before we do that, we should maybe start with movement. So first and foremost, I'd like to take your attention to the lower left corner here. There's a little question mark here. You press on that and it's going to give you a cheat sheet on all movement possibilities here, right? And what everything does. So as long as you have this, you never get lost inside here, all right? But to make things a little bit more intuitive, the first and mostly preferred method for people that play a lot of games would be holding down the right mouse button and just using the WASD keys. So this is just like playing a game, right? You got Q and Q and E for going up and down, and obviously look around with your mouse. It's a very powerful way of moving around, I think. Very efficient. Your second option is the one I think is nobody uses, but what do I know? So you hold down the left mouse button and you move forward and backwards by moving the mouse button. The mouse itself forward and back, and you look around by looking left and right. If you want to move up and down, you hold down the right mouse button with this, and you move the mouse up and down. And obviously, you can zoom in with the mouse wheel. And obviously, there's the Maya style, which is basically focus onto something with F. This is how you focus onto something, and you hold Alt, and it's going to rotate around the object that you focused on. More appropriately, more precisely, it's going to rotate around the point of origin of the object. Okay. If you don't have an object selected, press Escape, by the way, if you want to remove a selection. It will try to rotate around your mouse. I know it looks like it's rotating around the object right now, but it isn't, right? If we do this and my mouse is here, oh, it's still rotating around the object. Well, that's pretty cool. Actually, it actually never worked for me like that. Maybe they fixed it. It is at some center point anyway. You'd mostly want to do this once you focus onto an object. I think these are all the relative ways of moving around. So let's go around into actually manipulating things around in the scene. Let's get to it. First and foremost, you've got this little button here. When you press it, it's going to show you all four panes. Obviously, you have a layout here, different layouts you can select. But as it is right now, you have your left, your front, and your top panes. These are orthographic views, so only have two axes. You can see there's only Z and Y here, there's only Y and X here, and there's only Z and X here. And obviously this is your perspective mode. So if you want to move something very precisely, or just to the left or just to the right, and as you can see, it's also in wireframe mode. So if you need to see or look through something, this is a very handy thing to have. All right, but for now we're just gonna forget about those. And here we have our snapping settings. So for this to actually make some sense, let's select the statue again. Actually, let's select the chair this time around. Now, as you can see, I get the gizmo here, which is the translation gizmo, right? So this means if I click on the axis and I can move it up and down, the Z-axis in this case, they're color-coded as well. And there's also these little thingies here which are connected together. So if I want to move it onto the Y-axis and the Z-axis at the same time, but not on X, I could just grab these two and move it only in that direction. Okay, same goes for the other three axes. This is one thing that you wouldn't want to do. You could always move it according to all three of them, but because your monitor is 2D, I can't really move my chair down here like this. Yeah. In other words, I can grab the center, but the computer's not going to know that I want to move it down here, right? How can it know? Because I'm moving my mouse in 2D space. In other words, my screen is 2D. I'm not moving forward and backwards. Like I can't move my mouse away and towards me. So I find it like, unless you have VR or something, like you probably wouldn't use this. Next you have the, by the way, you activate this tool by pressing W or just clicking here. Next tool is the selection rotate stool. The rotation tool. Obviously, the right mouse button, by the way, is available anywhere. It's a contextual menu, by the way. I clicked it by mistake right now, but it's as good a time as any. It works basically depending on what you clicked that on. All right, so it'll have different settings here than it would have here, I think. Oh yeah, it does have different settings. All right, but anyway, you know, they're minor differences, but it's a fairly powerful tool. Most of the things you do in here, you can actually see here, where you can see the documentation at any time, though not on the object that you've clicked. So the rotation tool is very simple. Like I said, you just go left and right, you know, depending on the axis you want to rotate. Quite self-explanatory. Obviously, you can't rotate on, unlike the transform tool, where you could move two axes at the same time. You cannot rotate at the same time two axes. That's fairly self-explanatory, so we're done with that. And then we've got the scale tool, which is activated by pressing R, which is a nifty little thing because it works exactly like the transform tool, but instead of moving the target, it actually scales it up or down. And the one neat trick about this is if you want to flip something, you could actually scale it negatively and it's going to flip, right? So that's a pretty cool thing. For example, I want to flip this chair upside down and I want to move it upwards, right? And I want to rotate it in some weird manner, right? And there's our chair. This is the new setup. This is the new most efficient setup for a living room. All of your chairs should be like this. But yeah, so now that you understand what WENR does, you can actually understand what this thing does here. Essentially, you probably noticed that when I'm rotating things, or let's say I'm rotating this thing, it's gonna do this in increments of 10. Basically, these are the increments, okay? So you can set up the increments to be 10, 30, 45, whatever floats your boat. Same goes for scale and for transform, right? These are in centimeters, by the way. You know, if you'll probably be better off using the grid snapping, in other words, so that all of your placements are precise. Of course, you can turn this off, right? And once you turn this off, you can, you know, your rotations are going to be in decimals, and you can have very precise movement. Hopefully, you know what you're doing, and you probably, why would you need this? So I will enable these, and obviously the surface snapping options, you can enable these to snap onto particular surfaces when you are transforming, as in when you're moving your object, it could snap to particular surfaces, which is also enabled, by the way, with V, which would snap it to a vertex. So as you can see, I can snap this point to different vertices, and also that's only, by the way, available when you hold V. That's the V between C and B. And after that, you can press End to actually position your object right onto a surface. So let's say I want this object to touch the ground. I press End, and this is the collision for the object pressing the ground. Obviously, we don't see the collision just yet, but that's because we haven't gone over these menus here. All right. So before we're done with this side, actually, there's one more thing I need to say, is the local versus global or world positioning, as so to speak. So right now, as you can see, the Z, Y, and X axes on our object are aligned perfectly with this here small representation of the world axis. And let's say I want to move that chair this way. Let's say I want to move that chair this way, but according to its seat, right? I want to move its seat that way. So what I could do is maybe grab it like that and just move it this way, but that's not a very precise movement. And you know, depending on what I want, because this is a very simple example, this tool might not work for me at all. Therefore, I can actually disable the world axes and can select the local one, and as you can see, the local ones suddenly change in accordance to the objects X, Y, and Z. So right now the Z axis, as you can see here, the blue one, let me just pull out, the Z here is pointing upwards, whereas the Z here is pointing that way. Okay, so it's fairly simple to understand that in some cases this might be very helpful because you want to be moving objects according to their own local coordinate system. And same thing goes for rotation, by the way, right? And for scale, this is scaling according to the x-axis, the Z of the chair, right? If we check the world, what's wrong? Apparently it cannot be done on the world scale. For some reason, I thought it could be done. But anyway, you get the idea, right? If you need to do something on the chair, like for example, moving it around, you have your options here. Okay, what else do we need to talk about? Oh yes, these 4 menus. So the first one is the show menu, which is basically the stuff that's rendered onto the viewport. So the static meshes would be something that you can show. You remove that, there'd be no static meshes. Your navigation, your collision, for example, you could take a look at volumes and find collision. No. Sprites, visualize. Where the hell is the collision? Oh, there it is, collision. So you can take a look at the collision here. And as you can see, it's a little bit thicker than our actual chair, and therefore pressing the end key on your keyboard will not completely connect it to the ground. It's going to collect it with the collision in mind, assuming I can get a good angle at this. Oh yeah, by the way, if the camera is moving too fast, you can move it. You can adjust the speed from here. But I hope you get the idea anyway with this end key. I really don't use it that much. I don't think how it could be that useful, because in general the grid snapping helps quite a lot. But anyway, let's just remove the collision for now. So when it comes to these little things here, you can actually remove them. The sprites, they're called. So you can just hide them all, and they're not going to clutter your viewport. So this is basically what you're going to be seeing at all times, right? Like the flags, for example, if you got post-processing or motion blur. I believe there must be, yeah, the bounds. No, it's not the bounds. It's not the bounds. Mesh edges, no. Property coloration, no. Well, just look around these things here, because you can see a lot of different menus. But essentially, anything that can be seen here is in this menu. Let me just return this stuff to default. After that, you've got the lit. For example, how you're gonna light them, like the wireframe that we saw before. You're gonna look through them. Obviously, you can just disable it from the show if you want to look through them. You can even disable things based on their tags. Yeah, you've got your light rendering. So this is essentially disabling the light, no light at all. Then you've got your reflections, the lighting only being calculated, right, without the actual textures. So that's it's a pretty interesting drop down where you can like the viewports, for example, you can optimize them. You can check the complexity. I believe there must be somewhere here where you can see the. I'm still stuck on this volume here. No. All right, let's forget about it. This is your level of details, by the way. And the buffer visualization. Oh, there we go. No. It's basically, let's say, actually, let's return this to the lit version. So this would actually remove the. Let's say you want to see just the transparency, like the metallic, how much it's going to reflect stuff. This is what is metallic, right? This is reflection based. So as you can see, this is metal, right? How metal things are. But we're going to talk about what metallic and roughness later. So this is your little drop down for what's going to be lit and what's not going to be lit, and this is the perspective, obviously. In other words, remember here we saw the top down, the front, the side, the left. And by the way, these are per viewport, so you can actually remove these sprites from here, and they're going to be available on all the other ports. And this doesn't have to be wireframe, right? It can be lit as well, right? It can be just the lighting. It could be anything you really want. Let's put it back to wireframe though. And I'm still stuck on that collision mode. I'm sure I saw it somewhere. I just don't remember where exactly it was. As you can see, there's a bunch of menus, right? So you really have to dig at some point. Like you're gonna have to start digging and figuring, what exactly you need and what everything does. Yeah, this is totally different. I don't even know what that is for. But yeah, you can experiment with this drop down here. Anyway, on the last bit here, we've got left the content browser and our editing tab. So the content browser, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. This is where you see all the stuff in your game. It's basically one big folder. In this case, we can actually create a new folder if we want it, right? You can add new folder here, or with the right mouse button, you can just new asset. No, just new folder here, or from here, right? Whichever floats you boat. Obviously, it depends. Obviously, here this is your path, so you can even use your back and forward keys on your mouse if you have any. So this is very nice. And you can also have some filters. For example, you want only the blueprint classes here, and only the blueprint classes we're going to show. You can enable them and disable them. You can stack them together. So I want the physics too. I don't know, all the physics assets. We don't have any physics assets here, unfortunately. Let's say sounds, though, we want only the sound cues. These are all your sound cues. So you can stack them pretty much to infinity. You can also search here, so you're not going to get lost in your, in your content browser. Also, your view options, you can enable, for example, the engine content or the plugin content, depending on what you've got. So, the sky sphere, for example, is not available here, but it's available in the engine content. So if you click on it and show engine content, as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff like the tutorials are here, and the sky sphere is here, right? You've got your little mannequin here, right? There's a bunch of stuff like the game mode, for example. Oh wait, yeah, this is a game mode. Yeah, you've got a bunch of little things here to work with, and the engine classes as well. But this is only for C#, C++ users, because you need to open actually the editor here, code editor, and do this outside of Unreal Engine 4. Right, let's just hide this stuff for now because we don't really need it. And remove these. Disable all filters. Just remove all these filters and remove them, not just disable them. Right, so this is your content browser done. Obviously, you can import things from here, by the way. So if you got something to import, this is how you import stuff. Just go to FBX and it's gonna import in. But we'll do this once we actually have something to import in the first place. All right, I'm sorry I had to cut the video short for a second. Anyway, I'm back here. So let's continue where we left off. The last pane to look at is the placement tab, or at least the geometry tab, or whatever you want to call it, modification level building tab. And let's see what it's got here. We've got our basic geometry, which are cones and cylinders. You just drag and drop these things onto the, onto your level. You've got your player start, for example. This is your spawn point. You've got an empty pawn, which would be something which can be controlled by either a player or an AI. So imagine if this was a robot and an AI could take control of it, or maybe your player can take control of it. You maybe create something like this if you had a drop-in, drop-out type of co-op. But we'll talk about these classes in another video. What else? We got a point light. As you can see here, a point light essentially is a light bulb, right? So it's nothing different here in terms of physical properties. Although, as you can see here on the details pane, we actually have different settings. Like we can change the color of the light bulb. Let's say it has to be red. This one is going to be maybe yellowish tinty, right? So when it comes to lights, you actually probably be better off taking a look at this pane here. So if you got a spotlight as well, spotlight is another type of light where you basically rotate it, and you can increase the intensity of it or decrease the intensity of it. Obviously right now, like, you can't really see much of the effect it has, but once you bump up the intensity and maybe change the color to blue, you will quickly see that it actually has quite a significant impact and very different spray. As you can see, the light bulb actually has its own radius, which you can control, right? The attenuation, right? And the intensity of its own as well. Like this, these are all pretty much shared properties along the among the lights. The other one is the directional light, which is your sun. Now this sky sphere, I believe, is hooked up to the light source, skylight. Where is it? Light source. There it is. So where is it again? Oh, there. So as you can see, actually, this is how you use the. It's a nice demonstration of how to use this, the scene outliner, because, like I said, even in this small level, I kind of got lost. So you can imagine you've got a bunch of stuff, and it's always best to have them cataloged like this. Anyway, when it comes to the directional light, but this is an infinite light source, and it's always there, it's always present, and it's basically your sun. And obviously it has its own little tints. You can add the tint. I believe if I rotate it here, I might rotate the sky too. No, I'm not going to rotate the sky as well. Yeah, so this light source is actually managed by the skybox. So if we let's say some brightness, we should increase the brightness of the same thingy there. Horizon, some height. No, it doesn't want to change. This should actually change the weather here. For some reason it doesn't want to do that. Oh, we need to rebuild the lighting. Yeah, my bad. So let's build the lighting. This should be a fairly fast procedure. Yes, thank you. Yeah, check these files out, or actually build data. Nah, we don't need the build data. We're gonna revert everything back anyway. So now let's see if we can change this into, no? Yeah, I may have screwed something when I started actually playing with this sunlight, but at any rate, you get the point how this works. Then you've got the skylight, which is essentially, it's what it is. It comes up from the sky and it hits down. So let's make this another color. I don't know, green. Yeah. Currently, you don't really see much of an effect, but it's basically, it's like if you had a skylight in your building and you wanted light to fall down even when the sun is on this side, right? Or in this case, the sun is over here. As you can see, it's even purple, reflecting the color of our light here. For some reason, I really don't understand why I can't get the thing moving though. This should be changeable. 0.3. No, I don't know. It bugged out for me. Yeah, I shouldn't have touched this thing over here because it's connected. You know, once you restart the Unreal Engine, it should be fine. Anyway, what else do we have here? We've got the cinematics, which is your well, obviously camera placement and camera usage type deal. In general, it may be a faster thing to actually, at this point, and a better option to actually create your trailer within the engine. So this works just like a regular camera, and it records just like a regular camera, and can export just like a regular camera. So that's completely fine. Obviously, you can still do it the old school way, just record your in-game footage and just use a third-party software to stitch it all together. But using the cinematics and the sequencer in the Unreal Engine is it's a really powerful thing, and it works exactly like a movie editor. So you'd be perfectly fine, stitching up together some sequence of events and just exporting it into MP4 and uploading it to YouTube or whatever for your trailer. After that, you got the visual effects, which are essentially post-processing stuff and reflections, right? You've got your planar reflection, you've got your sphere reflection. These are all basically reflections. There's not that much stuff. There's plenty more things you can add. The geometry tab, these are, you may notice if you drag and drop a curved stair, for example, these are not static meshes, all right? These are basically brushes. You use this for prototyping, all right? You use this for prototyping. If you're making a level, you just want to take a look at how it's gonna, just want to see how it's gonna look to a particular degree. Let's say Your character has to go up there, and in this case a vertex snap would be really useless. You could, by the way, move the origin point of this item here, but we're gonna talk about this later. I think you could just do this from the transform, snap line. Well, there's a bunch of controls here. Really, I don't really use it that much when it comes to prototyping, because I just have the idea in my head and I do it in mine. But there was a way to rebake the center of the origin point of an object to whatever you want to put it. But anyway, this is how you would use it. You wouldn't use this in the final game because this is very expensive, and as you could probably figure out on yourself on the side here, there isn't really that much stuff happening, right? I mean, look at this. Compare this to a static mesh, which can take, you know, materials, and it's got a bunch of collisions and physics and lights and tags and whatnot. This thing is just there like a block, right? You use this to outline a use this to just outline your level. Okay, it's for prototyping. Obviously, I think you can create your own brushes, you know, just like stairs, etc. But you know, for level prototyping, you really don't need that much detail. When it comes to volumes, this is everything that you need for, let's say, your triggers, right? You've got your navigation meshes, like nav modifiers. This is for AI to actually be able to navigate around your level, right? You've got your level of details. You've got your culling distance, which is in general, these are, by the way, focused modifiers, right? Yeah, they have their own ranges usually. They can actually control an alt here. Well, it's not gonna allow you, but it's basically gonna tell you, like, let's say not render this or render that more than the other one. Masks, etc. Like, I don't even know what a kill zone is. The volumes determine when access should be killed. Oh, wow, they actually have a kill zone. That's pretty cool. I didn't know they had it here. So far, I always had to make my own. Yeah, see, it pays to just check out these things before you you know, have to remake something that's already there and available for you. Obviously, the all classes is basically everything you can paste. You can just drag and drop everything here. You see, like level bounds. These are invisible walls, basically. It's you know, there's a bunch of stuff here. I'm really not gonna go through all of these because as you can see, there's quite a lot of them. Even most of them have links to the documentation. Unfortunately, most of them don't. Okay, so some of them don't have links to the documentation, so it's kind of hard to figure it out. In terms of level boundaries, it's you know, it's fairly easy to understand. Even the definition itself tells you what it is. Essentially, instead of, you know, basically getting your level engulfed in these invisible walls, you just use that. Anyway, enough of this. Let's go to the paint tool. Well, the paint tool is quite simple, really. Actually, let's jump over to the geometry editing tool before we go on to paint. So here you've got your geometry editing. This is also part of the prototyping tool. So in this case, we had the pen, and the pen is basically something that works only in orthographics. So let's go. Let's go from the top, and let's use this bit here. Basically, what you do, let's say you want to have this surrounded by something, and you create a couple of polygons with space, right? And now this is not going to turn very well because the extrusion depth is ridiculous. But let's say this is what you want to do. This is your cut in, right? You can, apply. So we have just created a mesh. Now, when we flip back into our perspective, you're going to see that it basically is inside, like our geometry is inside this mesh. But in this case, you'd have something that could, you know, brush clip it. In other words, like you create another one and then delete out of it, because you can see it's additive, but there's a subtractive as well. So you create another one here, you create another one here, and it would be a subtractive type, and you subtract this one, you'd subtract this one from that one, like this. So it'd be, I think actually we might even see something when we go back to perspective. Yeah, so right? This is for prototyping only, again, like I said. So don't try to, you know, try to be fancy with this stuff, because like I said, you can't really add stuff to it. You can definitely extrude things, like you got a bunch of options here, but this is just very extremely cumbersome, right? It's just like you don't want to bother with this. This is only for your visual representation of what something needs to be done. But again, you know, if you got some time, just, you know, go and play around with it. You can definitely attach some surfaces to it, right? At least to the face. This is the face. You can select these different faces and I don't know, let's get some bricks. Right, you've got some bricks here, but like I said, these are expensive, so don't use them for your main level. These are just for prototyping. All right. Okay, I believe we're done with this level at the least. So let's just revert this thing back. Oh, I'm sorry. We actually have to change the map here for this to be easier. Don't save any of this and revert this back to its original state. The beauty of source control, also known as version control. By the way, here you can actually notice how to simulate. There you go. There, how now you simulate. And there's actually music being played around right now, and that is actually from... You can actually disable all the audio, I believe. No, we actually have to click on it. How do I disable these? Attenuation. Right click, disable. It doesn't matter really. You can delete it. Now, next time you start, everything comes back. Right, so that's the cool thing about the simulation, that you can delete things, you can do whatever you want. It's its own sandbox type deal. So you can move stuff around. Oh, my bad. I'm used to Maya. You can move stuff around, maybe lift the ocean water, maybe get this thing on the side here. Oh wait, that one you cannot move for some reason. Yeah, not everything can be moved. Oh, this is static. Maybe that's why. If it's defined as stationary, maybe it would be movable. Yeah, but once you're done with your simulation, and by the way, you can possess these very same pawns we were talking about. So if we had a pawn here and we possessed it, you'd actually be able to walk around, right? And there's ejection, like there's this hotkey for the eject. I just pressed escape, but you could eject and continue playing around. But as you can see, everything's back to normal here. Let's see what the errors are. Put log. Well, that's what it says. So it's not movable. Yeah. So this was not movable after all. Yeah. This is static, and this is movable. Yeah. Oops, my bad. So in here you actually have these 3 cues, for example. I believe you should be able to turn them off in some way. Oh, yeah. Stop. Or no. Not stop. Damn it. Stop. 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 No? Okay, well there is something here that can stop it. I just can't be bothered right now to go through all the details. Anyway, let's continue with our tour here. So after that, we went through the geometry. Now let's go into the painting tools. Now the paint tool is not really something that you'll be using most of the time, but it's just fun to play around with. All right. So let's just say we want to paint the texture. We want to paint this texture. I'm not sure if Unreal at this point actually supports painting textures onto other textures, like in Mudbox or something, or like Substance. But essentially what you do, you get a color. Let's say in this case would be red. And you select an object, and we would be painting on, okay, this is a shitty object to paint on. Yeah, we'd be painting on this, and we'd be painting on with, let's say, purple color. And simply maybe check it out first. There's no need to check it out anyway. We're not going to save. But as you can see, you know, there's stuff popping out. But because there's a bunch of these textures, you don't really get a complete paint here, right? So you can only paint on these particular surfaces. Maybe the oak will fare better. No? Yeah, the oak is even harder to paint on. This one will probably have a better idea. You see, unfortunately, I chose a color that is also sometimes used as transparency. So, come on, Pine. Do I really have to reselect you every single time I want to paint something here? Yeah, as you can see, it's not the most robust system in the world. For some reason, it doesn't want to let me paint on this. Okay, it's going to let me paint on this one, though. For some reason. This one is also going to let me paint, but I'm painting on the alpha, darkening it. So, like, you can do some stuff with it, but it's definitely not your go-to tool when it comes to, at least in my opinion, definitely not my go-to tool to be doing things. Obviously, in this case, you'd be painting on just the material, whereas you can paint on different layers, right? However, like I said, I've never seen anyone use this to to any extent, or at least to some mind-blowing results to achieve some of them. Like I said as well before, this is going to be most likely deprecated in the near future, especially since I've now seen the full GDC. The animation tools, the mesh editing tools, everything that's coming to 4.16 once we upgrade. We're going to go over that again if there's something super cool, but yeah, like, give it a shot with the paint, all right? Just have some fun with it. Paint something. For some reason that doesn't always work here, because it doesn't even let me actually choose a texture. Here it does. I already painted accidentally on it. This only has vertices, maybe. So you can paint this one vertex. This one vertex, you painted it blue or red. Can't even paint it red, okay. There, it's now red. But I don't know what we use this for, at least this tool. Now the landscape tool is actually pretty cool. Oh crap, I committed these changes, and that is not good. It's gonna take a while to save now. Yeah, so right now what it's doing is basically committing everything I've just mushed up together, but that's fine. We can revert everything back to its original state. Okay, what else do we got here? Oh, so I did paint them, all of them. So the terrain is actually, imagine if you had a piece of paper, and that piece of paper you can only use gray, yeah, shades of gray, and that would be 255 shades of gray. And obviously in this case, from 0 to 55, there's 256 numbers. So if you divide that by half, your sea level, so to speak, neutral ground would be 128 gray, right? That would be a neutral shade. And imagine if this thing, basically what it does, it takes that piece of paper, which is gray 128. This is one big plastic sheet. And 0 is black. So if you paint with shades of, if you shade it in and it darkens, so the darker it gets, the lower it's going to get. And the wider it gets, the higher it's going to get. So essentially, this is called a height map. You could paint this in Photoshop, or you can just grab a piece of paper and just paint some black and white spots on it, take a picture of it, and import it here. And it's going to create a terrain off of it. And it's essentially the same thing. Even if you're making this terrain, you're creating this terrain now. Oh crap! I made too big of a terrain. Yeah, way too big. Way too big, but you get the idea. This is your sheet of gray, and once you start pulling something up, that's turning into white. If you take a look from downstairs, this is getting whiter, right? And if you look at it from if you're going further down, as in with control, I believe in this case you'd be able to do it. No, shift. Yeah, so with shift and left mouse button. So if we took a look at this in terms of a height map, right? This would be, this here would be your white spot. This would be brighter than this. This is darker than that. Okay, that's what terrain is, and that's how you sculpt around it. And obviously you can paint on it as well, which you can paint a particular material on the actual landscape. But we're not going to do that, or let's just do that real quick. Do we have any default materials? No? Okay. I think I have a material somewhere in here. It should let me paint. Oh, maybe I need to build the lighting. Listen, you shouldn't really bother with this at this point. You really don't need it right now. But it's nice to know that this is where this thing lives, and you could play around with it. Like I said, don't go too deep, because we're not going to be using this. This is mainly used for big levels, as you can see. Even the default is huge. I mean, you can imagine how much this is a forest, essentially, right? It's pretty big. Yeah, and obviously here you've got your different editors. So you got your different component. Maybe I don't even know what that is. Oh yeah, paint the whole thing in something. And your patterns, if you got any patterns, this is the alpha pattern. But you got others as well. The texture maybe. I don't know, let's say brush. It should let you... It should let me do this. For some reason it doesn't, and I really don't care why not. However, if we move on to the foliage, this is what your next item on the agenda would be, to actually place a foliage here on this terrain, once you created the terrain, obviously. So it could be anything really. Cars, trees. Like, let's say you have a scrapyard, you need a bunch of cars, or you have a forest, you need a bunch of trees. You wouldn't be placing them one by one, right? So for that, you'd have to probably create a new asset type. Yeah, you need to go into starter content and save it here maybe. But then you need to add it to the source control, and we're not going to do that right now, because why bother? But essentially, you create an asset type, assign a mesh, and then drop it here, and that would be the end of it. Obviously, you've got your BSP, which is your the BSP is the stuff that we made before, the prototype stuff. The BSP brushes, they are for prototyping, so you can place stuff on there even though they're prototypes. There's really a bunch of things that you can learn from just playing around with the engine, especially with source control. It's extremely secure at this stage, right? You can't break it really, because I mean, look at this. Let's revert this back. Oh, it wasn't even checked out. Okay, so if we go to minimum default and don't save, and don't save here, and we have to actually restart, because I didn't check out any of these. So even if I save them, they're not going to be committed. But yeah, whatever. Build data cannot even open. Yeah, this is by the way your light map data. So don't delete this unless you want to rebuild your entire level's lighting again. And by the way, since you're here, you could actually go check some of these particle systems. Cascade, I think it was called in Unreal. So there's a very nice editor, which we'll go in depth later when we create an explosion for our game. By the way, as you can see, this is exactly the same level as the minimal default, as in the one we just started, with a couple of added benefits. So here we've got our different lamps. Oh, that is fast. We actually are very fast. So let's click on the light source. No, this is not the light source. The lights. Oh, it's placed inside the lamp. All right, so you need to actually open it up and see what it is, and you've got these different settings here. And for some reason it's movable, maybe because you want to break it. But yeah, so play around with it, and next time we'll actually talk about these here menus. Right, we're going to talk about this, the editor preferences, a bunch of them, and then we're going to talk about this, project settings, of which there are also tons of. And these are also source controlled, so that's completely fine. So yeah, feel free to play around. See you guys next time. Bye bye.